Hello, my name is Madeline McCully and I'm working with the Tower Museum in Derry with the Museums Tell Stories project. And one of the evenings that we had was about shirt factories. And since there were 18,000 shirt factory workers in the city and 44 shirt factories, you can see that it was one of the biggest employers, and mostly of women. Men did work, but they were the ones who cut out the shirts, and they were also usually the foremen. But my mother came to it probably through some experience of ironing, of smoothing, because my grandfather lived with us. He was a tailor, and when he made a pair of trousers, he would turn them inside, the legs inside, and to make a very sharp crease, he would wet soap and he would run this up where the seam would be, where the crease would be, in front and back on both legs. Then he would turn it out properly, and a goose iron is what he used. Now, a goose iron was about 10 inches long, and it was solid iron. It was very, very heavy, and it was heated on a gas ring or the fire. Usually he heated it on the gas ring, and he lifted it with a heavy, I suppose, just a heavy piece of material, because it was usually the handle was solid iron as well, and that was very warm. So when my mother was no age, apparently, she used to help my grandfather with ironing the trousers. So when she went down to the factory, at the age of 14, she left school. And when she went to the factory, they said to her, "Have you any experience of sewing or anything else that would be of use in the factory?" And she said, "Well, I can't sew very well, but I do know how to iron." So she was immediately employed as a patent turner. And the patent turner was the person who prepared the collars for stitching. A collar had the front and the back, and then it had the stiff interlining. And there was a template which was made of thin tin, and the patent turner would turn the seams in using an iron like this, turn the hem part in so that it made it easier for the stitchers to sew around it. And these irons were extremely heavy. I can hardly lift that. These irons were extremely heavy, so you can imagine that my mother had a very strong right arm. Now, she didn't use it very often, I have to say, but she was very, very good at wringing out blankets whenever they were washed in the spring. Now, the patent turners in the factory also were very popular, as were the smoothers. And because anyone who had an iron, at break time, the girls would bring in bread and some butter, and they would bring the slices of bread down to those who had irons, and they ironed and made toast. So you can imagine that they were very, very popular. Now, the smoothers, they had a different job. They were the ones who prepared for the packaging. The shirts, obviously, when everyone worked on them, they needed ironed, and they would iron them, and they would put the cardboard inside and fold them very neatly and slip them into the bags. Now, when the war started and the factory started to make uniforms, well, there were a lot of American naval personnel in the town. There were English, Canadian, French, every sort of personnel from the services that you could. And when they were packing the shirts, quite often they would put a note in the pocket with their name and address. And I have to say now that many romances started that way, when whoever received the note followed up on it. And of course, when the Navy were in, the girls in Derry all went mad. And they had to learn to dance, of course, because it was said that if you couldn't dance, you couldn't get a man. And so after the toast was made by the smoothers and it was buttered and eaten, the girls would retire to what was known as the parlour. Now, the parlour was just a fancy name for the toilets. And there was usually just one stool there, a wash hand basin, and maybe about 3 or 4 toilets. But there was enough room for them to learn to dance. And one person taught the other the foxtrot, the waltz, the jive, the jitterbug, whatever dance was in at that time, they were taught that in the parlour. And considering that there was only 10 minutes for them to get their toast and to learn to dance, it wasn't an awful lot of time. And of course, the smoothers had to stand all day. You couldn't sit down and iron. And that was quite a tiring job. And as factory workers then, they were not, and women, they were not very well paid. But one day, when the ironing of the toast was going on, and I have to say that the smell, the emanating from the toast, as you can well imagine, was absolutely beautiful. The lookout, who was a new girl, and she was to look out to tell if any of the bosses were coming, she was so interested in the gossip that was going on that she didn't see that the foreman was coming in. And the door burst open and the foreman came in, followed by a very distinguished visitor. And the foreman, when he saw the toast, went apoplectic. He was absolutely raging, particularly with this visitor who was obviously very, very important. And he wanted to say something, but the visitor came in and in a broad Lancashire accent said, "Oh, by gum," he said, "that is the best smell that I have had since I was a nipper, and my mother used to make toast over the fire on a toasting fork." And he said something to the foreman. The foreman, with a bad look at the girls, went off and brought in a mug of tea. And the visitor said, "Could I have a slice of that toast?" And he sat and he chatted with the girls. The foreman said, "You back to work now, time's up." And he said, No, leave them." He said, "I'm here to find out what the conditions are in the factory." And he said, "Well, one I can see," he said, "is this a stool that people normally sit on?" And some of the girls who were machinists said, "Yes." He said, "Well, they're not very comfortable, are they? And where did you get the cushions?" They said, "Well, we just used old rags and we sewed them up and made a cushion. And you sit on this for 8 hours a day?" They said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, we'll have to do something about that." Well, about a month after he left, arrived at the factory a whole lorry full of new chairs with backs on them for the girls. So the toast actually was responsible for the visitor making changes in the factory. And my mother loved the factory. She said, "A friend that you make in the factory is your friend for life. And the songs that you sang in the factory, you can sing for life," because they used to play the music very loud so that the girls would be able to listen to the music rather than the roar of the machines. And my mother, until the day she died, always spoke with great affection about being a patent turner in the factory. Now there's a little song, and I hope I can sing it. It's called "The Factory Girl." No more will I work in the factory, greasy up my clothes. No more will I work in the factory, dust all round my toes. Pity me, my darling, pity me, I say, pity me, my darling, and carry my blues away. No more will I wear this overall, it's worn and patched and torn. No more will I hear the factory horn that blasts out in the morn. Pity me, my darling, pity me, I say, pity me, my darling, and carry my blues away. Pity me, my darling, pity me, I say, pity me, my darling, and carry my blues away.